Hi, I'm Sahana. If you've ever felt like your background or your English is holding you back, then this story is for you. Today, I'm sharing my journey from clay floors to conference halls, how I turned broken sentences into powerful speeches, and how English became the bridge between my small village and a bigger world. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to Epic English Stories. Here, you'll find real stories, real struggles, and real growth, all in English, to inspire your journey and improve your English fluency, one story at a time. Let's begin. My name is Sahana, and this is the story of how I traveled from a forgotten village with clay floors and no mirrors to standing under bright lights in conference halls across the world. A story not just about learning English, but discovering the power of a voice no one expected to rise. I was born in a village so small. It didn't have a name on most maps. We had no street lights, no post office, and definitely no Wi Fi. But we had sunrises that painted the sky orange and people whose hearts were bigger than their homes. Our house had a thatched roof and a single bulb that worked when the electricity felt generous. The floor was clay, smoothened by my mother every week with a paste of cow dung and water, an ancient custom meant to purify and cool. It had a natural fragrance I still remember. My father was a potter. His hands were always coated with earth, shaping pots that fed us. My mother sold bangles in the nearby market. I was the youngest of three and the only one who seemed to ask every day, why are things this way? We had a government school about 2 kilometers away. We walked barefoot, dodging thorns and puddles. Our books were hand me downs, our uniforms faded from washing. But to me, those walks were a path to something I couldn't name, a world I hadn't seen but deeply believed in. The school taught basic subjects. English was there, but only on paper. Our teacher spoke it with heavy pauses and unsure eyes. We memorized sentences like, "This is a pen" and "Ram is a boy," but no one explained why English mattered. Until one day, a foreigner got lost and wandered into our village. Everyone stood at a distance, staring. I was the only one who walked up to him. I pointed to the well and said, "Water?" He smiled and nodded. That small word opened a world in my mind. What if I could speak his language? What if I could understand the books in my school that were locked behind English? What if English was the ladder out of this mud? That day, I made a promise to myself. I would learn English. I didn't know how, I didn't know where, but I knew I must. I didn't tell anyone, not my parents, not my teachers. It was my quiet rebellion, my own personal revolution. What came next was a storm I never saw coming. I don't remember when exactly I started falling in love with words, but I do remember the day I found my first English dictionary. It was in the library of our school, a dimly lit, underused room where students rarely stepped in. I had gone there searching for a science textbook. Instead, I found a thick book with a torn cover and yellowed pages. On the front, in fading print, it read Oxford Learner's Dictionary, 1985 edition. I didn't know it then, but that book would become my secret treasure. I borrowed it without anyone noticing. I don't think anyone would have missed it. That night, under the flickering light of our kerosene lamp, I opened it like I was opening a map to a lost kingdom. The first word I read was abandon. I whispered it quietly. Bandon. Below it, the meaning to leave someone or something forever. It felt heavy, like the word itself carried pain. Then came ability, the power to do something well. That one stayed with me. I began copying 5 words every day into a brown notebook. Not just the words and meanings, but how to pronounce them. I had no internet, no English speaking TV, no teacher to guide me, only that old dictionary and my own stubborn desire. To remember the words, I made stories out of them. I would say them out loud while sweeping the floors or helping Amma in the kitchen. Soon I began leaving little sticky notes all around our house on the rice jar, grain, the water pot, clay, the calendar, month, the wall surface, the ceiling fan, rotate. My younger brother thought I had gone mad, but I didn't care. Learning English had become a private revolution inside me. It was not just about learning a language anymore, it was about rewriting my life story. One evening, while collecting water from the village pump, I heard a group of boys mimicking lines from an English movie they'd seen at the town theatre. They didn't say the lines right, but they laughed anyway. I stood there silent, memorizing the rhythm of the sentences, the intonation, the confidence. I realized then English wasn't just a subject in school, it was a social signal. It meant you had access to something jobs, respect, a future, and I wanted that signal to shine from me. But there was a problem. At school, my English teacher often skipped grammar topics and instead focused on rote learning for the exams. We memorized paragraphs like parrots. I wanted more. I wanted to understand. I began staying back after school, trying to decipher the grammar book myself. One day, I mustered the courage to ask my teacher a question about conditional sentences. He looked at me and smiled faintly. Sahana, you are too ambitious for this school. I didn't know whether to feel insulted or proud. I chose the latter. That year, I came first in English in the district board exams. My parents didn't fully grasp the weight of it, but they could sense something good had happened. For the first time, I saw a flicker of pride in my father's eyes when I spoke in English to a government officer who came to our village. At night, as I stared at the cracked ceiling of our house, I imagined myself speaking fluent English on a stage, dressed not in a faded kurti but in something smart and crisp. The audience applauding not because I was a village girl, but because I had something to say. And then came an opportunity that would test everything I had learned. The first time I ever stood on a stage, my legs refused to move. It was the inter-school English elocution contest, and I had been selected. Not because I was the most fluent speaker, but because I was the only one who had dared to submit a speech written entirely in English, with no help. Our school had never sent anyone to represent us before. We didn't have money for blazers or a microphone to practice with. We barely had working fans in our classrooms. But I had a voice and I had a message. I had titled my speech, Why We Need to Speak Up. For a week, I practiced in front of our bathroom mirror. I timed my pauses, memorized the structure, and imagined the applause. My brother, who usually teased me, started calling me Madam Sahana. Even Amma stitched a simple white kurta for the occasion using leftover fabric. The day of the competition, my headmistress handed me the bus fare in coins wrapped inside a paper. Speak from your heart, Sahana, she said. They may have polished shoes, but you have polished words. When we reached the town auditorium, I saw something I had never seen before: velvet curtains, gleaming stage lights, students in coats and ties. My white kurta felt invisible in that sea of polish. I overheard two girls whisper, She must be here for housekeeping. I clenched my speech tighter. When it was my turn, I walked up slowly. The spotlight hit my face like lightning. The microphone wobbled as I adjusted it. I took a breath and began. Good morning to all. My name is Sahana. I am here to speak. And then silence. The microphone crackled and went dead. For 3 terrifying seconds, my voice disappeared. I felt the panic rising, my heart slamming against my chest. The auditorium whispered, One of the judges gestured to the technician, who began fixing the mic. In that moment, I remembered something my appa once told me. If your voice shakes, let it shake. But speak anyway. So I spoke. I stepped away from the mic, projected my voice, and began again, louder this time, raw, real. My name is Sahana, and I come from a place where children walk miles barefoot to reach school, where girls are told that their future ends at the kitchen doorstep, where English is a foreign bird we are not allowed to touch. People stopped murmuring. The auditorium became still. But today, I continued, I choose to touch that bird. Even if my grammar fails, even if my accent is not perfect, I will speak. Because if we wait for perfection, we'll never begin. By the end of my speech, I wasn't shaking anymore. The broken mic didn't matter. The silence that followed my last line was not awkward. It was powerful. And then came the applause. Not polite claps, but something more, a standing ovation. One of the judges, a tall woman in a navy blue sari, walked up to me and said, That was not just a speech, that was a spark. I didn't win first prize that day, but I won something greater, an invitation. The judge, who turned out to be a professor from a well known city college, asked if I would be interested in attending a youth English workshop during the summer. We'll sponsor you, she said. You have potential. Potential. That word became my new favorite. For the first time in my life, someone from outside my world had looked at me and seen not poverty, not struggle, but promise. That night back in the village, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the moment over and over, the silence, the speech, the applause. I whispered the word potential to myself like a lullaby. The clay floors I had once cleaned were still beneath my feet, but suddenly they felt like a launching pad. The journey ahead was still long, but now it had direction. Next stop, the city. The train to the city smelled like metal, sweat, and hope. Amma packed dry rotis with jaggery and a cloth wrapped prayer coin she placed in my hand with trembling fingers. Don't lose your values in the city, she said. Appa just gave me a silent nod, but his eyes glistened more than mine. I sat by the window watching the green fields blur into highways and buildings. It was my first time leaving our village, and the first time I would stay somewhere that had elevators and electricity 24/7. But more than that, it was the first time I would be surrounded by fluent English speakers, and I was terrified. The workshop was held at a prestigious language institute nestled between cafes and bookstores that smelled of cinnamon and confidence. The students there were from elite schools with polished English and even more polished shoes. Their bags had brand names I had only seen on magazine scraps pasted to our classroom wall. I had one kurta, one pair of sandals, and a voice I wasn't sure was good enough anymore. On the first day, our instructor, a woman with silver hair and glasses that made her look like wisdom itself, asked us to introduce ourselves in English. One by one, students stood and spoke effortlessly. My name is Aryan. I love creative writing and classical guitar. I'm Sanaya. I've published 3 poems online and I'm learning French too. When my turn came, I stood up. My heart thumped like a marching band. I I'm Sahana, I said slowly. I'm from a small village. I learn English from books and myself. I love to speak truth. A few students smiled kindly. Others looked at their phones. One boy smirked. That's sweet, he whispered to the girl next to him. I sat down, feeling my confidence shrink like wet cloth in the sun. But then something unexpected happened. The instructor said, Sahana, your introduction was the most effort, honest one today. Never confuse fluency with depth. Her words held me together like thread. Throughout the workshop, I stayed quiet in group discussions, but took furious notes. Every new word was a discovery. Every pronunciation correction was gold. I watched the others not with jealousy, but curiosity. How did they pause naturally? How did they transition between ideas? How did they think in English? One evening, I skipped dinner to sit at the Institute library, a glass walled space filled with more books than my entire district. I picked up To Kill a Mockingbird, not because I understood it, but because it was on the recommended list. I read the first page 5 times before the sentences made sense, but I didn't give up. At night, I recorded my voice on a borrowed phone and played it back, practicing pronunciation. I mimicked TED Talks and read news articles out loud. I started asking questions in class, even if my grammar stumbled. And slowly, something shifted. One day, I was asked to deliver a group presentation. The others were nervous, but I was oddly calm. I spoke with clarity, conviction, and that fire that first brought me here. Afterward, Aryan, the boy who once smirked, said, "You know, when you speak, people listen." That was the moment I realized I didn't need a foreign accent. I needed presence. The city didn't change me, it revealed me. When the workshop ended, the silver haired instructor handed me a small card. "There's a scholarship for a public speaking program in Bangalore. I think you should apply." The card read, "Voices of Tomorrow." I held it like it was a passport. When I boarded the train back to my village, I was no longer scared. I had found something far more important than a perfect vocabulary. I had found my voice. When I stepped off the train and felt the dusty earth of my village beneath my feet again, I wasn't the same Sahana who had left. The sky looked the same. The buffalo still chewed lazily near the pond. Amma still called my name from the front porch, her voice rising with emotion. But I was different. I had seen a world where people build dreams not with bricks but with words. The next few days were full of questions, relatives asking about the city, friends teasing me for my big city English. I laughed with them, but deep down, I carried a growing desire, a desire to give what I had learned back to the soil that had raised me. So I began with the children. Every evening, under the banyan tree near the temple, I gathered kids from our village. I brought my notes, my books, and my belief that even here, in a place with cracked walls and flickering bulbs, English could bloom. We started with the basics: alphabets, greetings, small conversations. I used everything I had learned from the workshop: storytelling, role plays, games. We practiced hello and how are you with laughter and broken accents. But I didn't correct their accent. I told them, "Your voice matters no matter how it sounds." News spread. Soon teenagers joined in. Even a few shy women began asking, "Can we learn too?" I said yes. Why not? English wasn't just for job interviews, it was a key to self belief. One night, Appa sat silently outside the house, listening to me teach under the banyan tree. "You make the village sound like a school," he said with a small smile. I knew then that he approved, even if he didn't say it out loud. Months passed, and the banyan tree sessions became something more. I called it English Angan, a courtyard of confidence. We didn't have chairs, but we had curiosity. We didn't have whiteboards, but we had the will to speak. It was around that time that I got the call. A woman with a cheerful voice introduced herself. "Hello, this is Priya from Voices of Tomorrow. Your workshop mentor referred you for our National Storytelling Fellowship. Would you like to come to Bangalore for the final round?" I froze. This wasn't just an interview, this was a door, and I was standing before it, hand on the handle. I looked around, at the children under the tree, at the women who now spoke with pride, at Appa's quiet nod. I whispered, "Yes, I'd be honored." That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of our village. The crickets, the rustle of banana leaves, the distant hum of temple bells, and all I could think was, if I can do this, anyone can. But deep inside, another thought flickered too. What if I fail? Then I remembered what I told the kids every evening. Fluent is not perfect. Fluent is brave. And so I packed my clothes, wrapped Amma's prayer coin in a handkerchief again, and took the bus toward Bangalore. This time, I wasn't just seeking confidence. I was carrying the confidence of an entire village with me. The bus to Bangalore roared through hills and towns, and my mind raced even faster. This city, bigger, brighter, and faster than any I had seen, made me feel like a tiny drop in an ocean of achievers. Glass buildings scraped the sky, and people walked with purpose, phones glued to their ears, English words flying like birds in every direction. But I wasn't afraid. I had taught under a banyan tree. I had seen children's eyes light up with hello. I had watched shy women pronounce thank you like it was magic. I had earned my right to be here. When I entered the Voices of Tomorrow Conference Center, the walls glowed with posters of speakers, mentors, and changemakers. The reception table welcomed me with a badge. Sahana, finalist. That small piece of paper carried every moment of my journey. Every clay floor, every lantern lit night, every pause between is and are. In the orientation room, I met others from across the country. Some wore kurtas, some jeans, some salwar suits. All of us carried our stories like flags. One girl had taught English through dance in Kashmir. A boy had used podcasts in rural Punjab. We shared our journeys over tea and nerves. Then came the challenge. Each of us had to present a 10-minute talk in English on stage in front of an audience of educators, journalists, and sponsors. Our topic: the power of voice. That night, I stared at my notebook in the hostel room. Words danced and disappeared. My palms were sweaty. My heart thudded like the village drum during Holi. I thought of quitting, just silently boarding the train home. But something held me there. A whisper inside said, "You don't have to be perfect, just true." I remembered Amma telling me stories by the lantern. I remembered the giggles of kids when I first taught them good morning. I remembered my own cracked voice on my first day in the city. I began writing. And I wrote not just a speech but a promise. The next day, I stood backstage, trembling. Lights blazed, cameras blinked. The mic felt cold in my hand. My legs shook like they did before my first school debate. Then someone announced, "Next up, we have Sahana from Tamil Nadu, founder of English Angan." As I walked onto the stage, the audience blurred. My vision narrowed to one thing: the belief that my story mattered. I took a deep breath and began. "Good afternoon, my name is Sahana. I come from a village where the walls are made of mud, but the dreams are made of sky." I spoke of my fear of English, my first hello, my struggle in college, the banyan tree classroom, and the confidence that bloomed from broken sentences. I spoke not as a girl who mastered English, but as one who made peace with it. I ended with, "English is not just a language, it's a mirror. When we speak it, we don't just see grammar, we see courage, clarity, and connection." Silence. Then applause. Loud, long, real. I didn't win the first prize that day. But a woman from the audience walked up to me and said, "Your words reminded me why I became a teacher." Another handed me her card. "We're starting a program for rural mentors. We want you in." And just like that, I realized something powerful. A stage doesn't make you courageous. You carry your stage within you every time you choose to speak up. The weeks after the conference felt like I had stepped onto a new planet. Emails began to arrive, one from a youth fellowship, another from a podcast in Delhi, and one with a subject line that made my heart race: invitation to speak at the Global Learners Forum. Malaysia. I read it twice, thrice. Then I checked if it was real. It was. They wanted me to share my journey with other educators, learners, and leaders from around the world. The flight ticket, accommodation, and translator, if I needed one, would be covered. All I had to do was say yes. But as I sat under my village sky that night, I wasn't sure. Me? Sahana, speaking outside India, I thought of my passport application still gathering dust. I thought of my broken English phrases from 3 years ago. I thought of that muddy courtyard where I first read aloud from a borrowed textbook. But something had shifted in me. It wasn't just about English anymore. It was about what English had given me. Not fancy words, but freedom to dream, to express, to lead. So I said yes. Flying to another country felt like magic. I watched cities become clouds and clouds become oceans. I held my little notebook tightly as the plane landed in Kuala Lumpur. At the conference, the room was full of accents: Australian, Kenyan, Spanish, Chinese. Some words were fast, some were slow, some were clear, some not so much. But I realized something beautiful. Everyone was trying to understand. Everyone wanted to connect. English wasn't about being flawless, it was about being fearless. When my turn came, I stood in front of people I had never met, strangers from other continents. But I didn't feel alone because inside me stood the voices of my students, my Amma's encouragement, my college tears, my village hopes. I began, Namaste, I'm Sahana, from a small village in South India, a place where English was once a stranger, but today it's a friend I travel with. I spoke slowly, pausing at every emotion. I shared how English helped me teach barefoot children, how it unlocked doors I didn't know existed, how it brought confidence to my shyest students, and how it made me believe in myself. When I finished, a professor from Nigeria came up and said, Your story is not just Indian, it's global, it's human. A woman from Indonesia hugged me. A man from Brazil said, You made me cry. I'm going back to train village teachers again. That night, back in my hotel room, I sat by the window and looked at the city lights. And I thought this journey began with fear of one language, but it led me to the language of hope, unity, and change. I wrote in my journal English is not a destination, it's a bridge to dreams, to people, to the world. And with that, I knew this was just the beginning. After I returned from Malaysia, I noticed something strange. My village looked smaller. Not physically, no, the clay floors were still here, the narrow paths winding through banana trees, the same hum of cows and crickets. But inside me, something had grown. I had seen the world, and now I wanted to bring the world here. The first thing I did was gather my old students, those who had once learned under the mango tree, those who had stuttered their first English words, just like me. We sat on mats, with chai in hand, as I shared stories of the global conference, the people I met, the lessons I learned, and the power of simply believing that our voices mattered. They were mesmerized. Then I said something that would change everything. Why don't we create our own English learning circle right here in the village? No classrooms, no fees, just commitment. There was silence. Then someone said, But who would join? Another added, What if we fail? I smiled. We've already succeeded. We're speaking about it in English. We called it Voice of the Village. At first, it was just 10 of us. We met twice a week in the Panchayat hall. Old plastic chairs, a blackboard with broken corners, and hearts wide open. I wasn't the only teacher anymore. Each of us took turns sharing what we knew. Ravi, who now worked in a textile shop, taught business English phrases. Meera, who had become a school librarian, led reading sessions. And little Arjun, who once couldn't say his name aloud, now stood confidently reading The Little Prince to a group of adults. What started small began to grow. word spread to neighboring villages. New learners came walking for miles. Mothers came with babies on their hips. Retired uncles joined just to listen. Some couldn't even read their native language. But they came because hope doesn't need qualifications. Then one evening, something happened I'll never forget. A young girl named Pooja, barely 14, stood up and said in halting English, I want to become a journalist. I want tell stories of our people. The room was silent. And then it erupted into claps, real, raw claps, the kind that makes your eyes stings. That was the moment I knew. This was no longer a class. This was a movement. Soon we got a local sponsor. They gave us a used projector and a second hand laptop. I began making video lessons, basic English in Tamil and Kannada. We uploaded them to YouTube. I didn't expect more than a few hundred views. But the videos started spreading. 500 views became 5,000. People from other states messaged asking if they could replicate our model. A teacher from Jharkhand called crying, saying our story gave her the courage to start her own circle. One evening, I received a message that made me sit down. Dear Sahana, I'm writing from Kenya. We are learning English using your videos in our village school. Thank you. I stared at the screen. Kenya? A place I had only read about in textbooks, now connected by a few words, a few smiles, and the invisible thread of shared humanity. That night, I sat alone under the same sky I had grown up under, and I whispered, Amma, Appa, our little village now speaks to the world. I wasn't just teaching English, I was helping people believe in their worth. And it all started with one terrified girl holding a borrowed dictionary. There's a moment in everyone's life when you look at your reflection, not in a mirror, but in the eyes of others, and you finally see yourself. For me, that moment came during a call with a girl from Kolkata named Ayesha. She had found one of our Voice of the Village videos online and sent me a message on Instagram. It was a simple text. Didi, I want to speak English like you. But I stammer. People laugh. We began to chat. Every day, we'd spend 15 minutes on a video call. I'd correct her gently. We'd laugh when she got stuck. And we'd celebrate the small wins, like pronouncing responsibility without pausing. One evening, she looked at me and said, Didi, I joined my school's debate team. I was scared, but I spoke in English. My eyes filled with tears. I wasn't teaching English anymore. I was giving someone back their voice. And I realized that was my dream all along. Not just to speak, but to help others speak too. After that, I decided to formalize our work. I founded a non profit called Speaklight. It focused on three pillars. One, confidence based English training for underprivileged youth. Two, community led language circles like the one in our village. Three, scholarships for rural girls who wanted to study communications or journalism. At first, it was just a name on a piece of paper, but soon the dream took shape. We received a grant from an international NGO. I was invited to speak at a conference in Germany about grassroots education. My TEDx talk, From Clay Floors to Conference Halls, crossed 1 million views in 6 months. Everywhere I went, I carried my story. And every time I stepped on stage, I whispered to myself, Remember where you began, Sahana, and speak for those who are still afraid. But success brought something else too, pressure. The expectations grew heavier. The emails never stopped. Media houses wanted interviews. Donors wanted updates. Schools wanted me to visit. And deep inside, a small voice whispered, Are you enough for all this? One night, after a long week of travel, I broke down. I sat on the bathroom floor of a hotel room in Delhi, staring at the tiled walls, feeling more lost than I had in years. I called Meera, my old friend from the village, now a teacher in Chennai. Through sobs, I said, I'm scared. What if I fail? What if it all crumbles? She said something simple, but it stitched my heart back together. Sahana, remember, you didn't build this for applause, you built it for them. The next morning, I walked into a government school in Haryana. Hundreds of girls in faded uniforms sat cross legged waiting for my session to begin. As I stood in front of them, I looked into their curious eyes. I saw versions of myself, some scared, some hopeful, some still unsure of their place in the world. I began with a line I had once written in my diary when I first dared to dream. I was born where clay touched my feet and silence filled my mouth. But now I walk on stages and my voice echoes in many hearts. There was silence. Then one girl stood up and said, Didi, can I also speak English with you? I nodded. She came forward. She stuttered. She forgot a word, then found another. And the moment she finished, the entire hall clapped. It was loud, real, raw, and it reminded me success isn't standing alone on a stage, it's standing with others, lifting them up until their voices echo too. That night, I wrote in my journal, this is my dream, not to be the loudest, but to create a world where every girl from every clay floor believes her voice can reach any hall. The rains had returned to my village. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth and memories. I sat on the veranda of my childhood home, barefoot, just like the little girl I once was, watching the mud paths glisten under the monsoon sky. The same paths I once ran on, book in hand, chasing dreams bigger than anyone around me could understand. In my lap rested a notebook. Not a laptop, not a phone, just paper. And a pen. It felt right, because today I wanted to write something I had never written before. A letter to the girl I used to be. Dear little Sahana, I know you're scared. I know the world feels too big for a girl who's still learning how to pronounce possibility. You hide your dreams behind silence, thinking maybe if you don't speak them out loud, no one can laugh. But listen to me, speak them anyway. Even if your voice shakes, even if your grammar stumbles, even if your words come out in broken pieces, speak. Because one day, those broken pieces will build bridges. Bridges between classrooms and boardrooms, between clay floors and conference halls. You will make mistakes. Your tongue will twist around foreign sounds. You will doubt yourself 1,000 times. But you will also teach others. You will help a girl in Kolkata debate in English. You will speak on global stages. You will build something that outlives your fear. And Ma, she'll be proud. Not because you became famous, but because you stayed kind. So keep walking, even when your feet are tired, even when your English is slow, even when you feel invisible. Because one day you'll look back and you'll see a trail of footsteps behind you. Footsteps of girls who followed your voice. Because you dared to find it first. Love, Sahana. As I finished the letter, the rain softened to a drizzle. I folded the page and tucked it into my diary, the same one where I had once written broken English sentences in secret. This one wasn't broken, it was whole. The next morning, I had a session with students at a tribal school in Jharkhand. I read them my letter. One of the girls raised her hand and asked, Didi, when did you know you had made it? I smiled. I haven't, I said, because the journey never really ends, and I don't want it to. They looked confused, so I continued. Every time one of you speaks a new word, every time you dare to raise your hand, that's what I'm chasing. Not perfection, not fame, just the next voice, the next girl who believes she can. Now, when people ask me to summarize my journey, I say this I didn't just learn English, I learned courage. I learned that stories can start on clay floors and end in conference halls, but only if we're brave enough to write them in our own voice. And if you're listening to this story, wondering if your voice matters, let me tell you something. It does. Your voice is waiting for you to find it. And when you do, someone else will find this through you. Final words. A new beginning. This story, my story, is not just mine anymore. It belongs to every girl who has ever whispered words in the dark, afraid someone would hear her accent and laugh. It belongs to every village that ever watched a child dream and wondered if it would ever come true. It belongs to you if you've ever doubted yourself or your language or your worth. Because if a barefoot girl from a broken home can rise from mud floors to speaking on stages across the world, so can you. Just take the first step and let your voice lead the way.